Everyone has heard of Jack the Ripper, but Jack was just one killer, operating for a few months with 5 confirmed victims. These are the Victorians who got away with murder for decades. Some killed hundreds, and history barely remembers their names. In the mid-19th century, British society did not hide from death, it consumed it. True crime was a massive commercial enterprise. The Illustrated Police News and daily newspapers sold weekly crime roundups as cheap entertainment. When a notorious killer was scheduled for execution, public hangings at prisons like Newgate transformed into civic festivals, drawing crowds of 50,000 spectators. Yet, while the public watched the gallows, a quiet, far more lethal epidemic unfolded in plain sight, completely ignored. Desperate unmarried mothers, forced into workhouses by the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, turned to a legal, unregulated trade: baby farming. For a fee of £5 to £10, women offered to adopt or wet nurse unwanted infants. No central registry tracked these children, no records followed them. At the same time, working-class families enrolled children in burial clubs. A weekly contribution of pennies guaranteed a payout of £4 to £5 upon death, far exceeding the £1 cost of a basic funeral. In a world of extreme poverty, an infant's death became a financial asset. When these children died, authorities rarely asked questions. Arsenic was cheap, widely available, and virtually untraceable to the untrained eye. It caused gastric symptoms that looked identical to common, natural stomach illness. Although chemist James Marsh invented a highly sensitive detection test in 1836, regional coroners routinely refused to order it. The test was expensive, and rural county courts hesitated to pay the fees. This institutional negligence was compounded by deep-seated Victorian gender bias. Society viewed women as naturally nurturing, fragile, and domestic. Investigators simply could not conceive of a woman as a calculated, repeat killer. Coroners frequently skipped autopsies on women and infants out of modesty and a cultural refusal to suspect wives and mothers. This blind spot, paired with financial incentives and lax laws, created a perfect sanctuary for the era's most prolific serial killers. They did not need to hide in dark alleys. They operated in the comfort of their own homes, shielded by the very systems designed to protect the vulnerable. On March 30th, 1896, a bargeman working on the River Thames near Reading spotted a sodden brown paper parcel floating in the water. He hauled it aboard. The package was weighted with a brick. Inside lay the decomposing body of an infant girl, her neck tightly bound with white dressmaker's tape. This child was Helena Fry. The local police examined the wrapping paper. Underneath the water damage, they deciphered a faded name and address: Mrs. Thomas of Grove Road, Reading. It was an alias. The address belonged to 57-year-old Amelia Dyer. Dyer was a trained nurse and midwife who had spent nearly 30 years cultivating a reputation as a respectable, motherly caregiver. She advertised in local newspapers across Reading and Bristol, offering safe, loving homes for unwanted infants. Desperate, unmarried mothers paid her lump sums of £5 to £10, equivalent to months of wages, believing their children would be adopted into comfortable lives. Instead, Dyer pocketed the money. She did not buy milk or warm clothes. She kept the babies just long enough to secure the cash, then strangled them with white dressmaker's tape. It was a swift, silent method that left no marks of struggle. She tied a neat knot under the left ear, wrapped the small bodies in paper, and dropped them into the dark currents of the Thames. The discovery of Helena Fry exposed the entire operation. When detectives searched the Grove Road house, they found piles of baby clothing, letters from pleading mothers, and receipt books detailing hundreds of transactions. The Thames was dragged. Over the next few weeks, police pulled more than 50 weighted parcels from the river mud, many bearing the same signature white tape. By the time of her trial at the Old Bailey in May 1896, investigators estimated that Dyer had killed between 200 and 400 children over her 20-year career. She was convicted of murder in minutes. On June 10, 1896, Dyer walked to the gallows at Newgate Prison. She was 57. She uttered her last recorded words to the prison warder. "I used to like the babies." In the mid-19th century, throughout the parishes of County Durham, Mary Ann Cotton lived a highly mobile life as a wife, mother, nurse, and housekeeper. She was a familiar, seemingly respectable face. But wherever Cotton settled, family members died. Her weapon was arsenic. It was cheap, tasteless, and easily dissolved in a warm cup of tea. Between the 1850s and the early 1870s, Cotton poisoned an estimated 15 to 21 people. The victims included 3 of her 4 husbands, a lover, her own mother, and at least 11 of her 13 children. After each funeral, Cotton collected the payout. She had systematically enrolled her family members in local burial clubs. For the price of a few weekly pennies, a death yielded a payout of several pounds, a significant sum for a working-class woman. Because Victorian child mortality was exceptionally high, and the symptoms of arsenic poisoning closely mirrored gastroenteritis, doctors routinely blamed natural causes. For 20 years, her crimes remained entirely invisible. The pattern broke in the summer of 1872 in the village of West Auckland. Cotton approached a parish official named Thomas Riley, asking to have her 7-year-old stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, committed to the workhouse. She complained that the boy was in her way. Riley explained that she would have to accompany him. Cotton remarked that the child would not trouble anyone for long. 5 days later, the boy was dead. Riley's suspicion was immediate. He knew Cotton had recently tried to secure life insurance for the child. He refused to let the death pass and notified the local authorities. A doctor performed a basic chemical test on the boy's stomach tissue, revealing unmistakable traces of arsenic. Cotton was arrested. Although investigators believed her campaign of murder had begun as early as 1852, prosecutors faced a difficult legal challenge. Due to the limitations of the era's records, they could formally charge her with only a single count of murder, the killing of young Charles Edward. On March 24, 1873, Mary Ann Cotton was hanged at Durham Gaol. In October 1891, a different kind of predator arrived in London's impoverished Lambeth district. Dr. Thomas Neill Cream was not a desperate back-alley midwife or an impoverished housekeeper. He was a university-trained medical doctor, distinguished by his gold-rimmed spectacles and high silk hat, but his professional respectability was a shield for murder. Cream targeted vulnerable young women, mostly sex workers. Operating under the guise of medical aid, he offered them pills he claimed would cure routine stomach ailments. The capsules actually contained lethal doses of strychnine. Strychnine kills with agonizing cruelty. Within hours of swallowing Cream's medicine, his victims suffered violent, uncontrollable convulsions. Their muscles locked, their backs arched into rigid curves, and they suffocated while fully conscious. In London alone, Cream killed at least 4 women: Matilda Clover, Ellen Donworth, Alice Marsh, and Emma Shrivel. This was a continuation of a pattern that began decades prior. Authorities in Canada and the United States already suspected Cream of multiple poisonings. In 1881, an Illinois court convicted him of murdering his mistress's husband with strychnine. He served 10 years in Joliet prison before his sentence was commuted, allowing him to cross the Atlantic and select new targets. Cream did not just exploit his patients' trust. He actively tried to control the police response. He began writing anonymous letters to journalists and investigators under various aliases. In these letters, he accused innocent citizens, including a Scotland Yard detective, of the very poisonings he had committed. His arrogance proved fatal. During the investigation, Cream befriended a detective constable, John Haynes. As they walked the Lambeth streets, the doctor routinely brought up the unsolved poisonings. He demonstrated an incredibly detailed, suspicious knowledge of the crime scenes. Haynes noted this behavior and reported him. Police arrested Cream in June 1892. Following a sensational trial at the Old Bailey, he was hanged at Newgate Prison on November 15, 1892. As the executioner pulled the lever, Cream reportedly began to utter a final claim. "I am Jack the..." The rope cut him off. While some seized on this to link him to the Whitechapel murders, the claim is historically impossible. Cream was locked inside an Illinois penitentiary during the entire 1888 Ripper Panic. The connection remains an unverified myth, yet it remains the primary reason his crimes are remembered at all. On March 2, 1879, a quiet cottage in Richmond, southwest London, became the setting for one of the most savage domestic crimes of the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas, a widow in her 50s, lived alone with her 30-year-old Irish servant, Kate Webster. Their relationship was highly volatile. After returning from church that Sunday evening, the two women argued. Webster threw Thomas down the stairs, then choked her to death. To hide the murder, Webster dismembered the body using kitchen knives and a meat saw. She boiled the severed limbs and torso in a laundry copper to strip the flesh from the bones. Contemporary press reports alleged that Webster offered the melted human fat to local residents as dripping, telling them it was lard. She packed the remaining skeletal parts into a black Gladstone bag and threw it into the River Thames. Webster then dressed in Thomas's clothes, assumed her identity, and began selling off her employer's furniture. When a family member grew suspicious of the sudden disappearances, Webster fled to Ireland. She was quickly arrested, returned to London, and tried at the Old Bailey. In July 1879, Webster was hanged at Wandsworth Prison. The trial transfixed London. The press focused heavily on the brutal nature of a female killer and the gruesome cannibal dimension, ensuring the case dominated public attention. This lurid domestic horror captivated a society that remained largely blind to the quieter, systemic serial killings occurring in ordinary homes nearby. But the mystery endured. In October 2010, workmen excavating a pub cellar in Barnes uncovered a severed human skull. Forensic testing proved it belonged to Julia Martha Thomas, recovered 131 years after her death. Amelia Dyer was not a solitary anomaly. She was part of a widespread trade that stretched across England, Wales, and the British colonies. This quiet economy turned unwanted children into commodities, operating from the 1860s through the 1890s. In October 1870, the British justice system faced this industry directly. Margaret Waters became the first baby farmer executed in England when she was hanged at Horsemonger Lane Gaol. Police had raided her Brixton home, uncovering 9 severely malnourished infants. Investigators ultimately linked Waters to 19 deaths, caused by deliberate starvation and lethal doses of opium. The prosecution focused on the death of 15-month-old John Walter Cowan, proving Waters poisoned the child to avoid the cost of his care. The Waters trial prompted Parliament to pass the Infant Life Protection Act of 1872. The new law required anyone boarding more than one infant under age 2 for payment to register with local authorities. But enforcement was almost non-existent. Inspectors were rare, record-keeping was minimal, and impoverished mothers still had no other options. The trade simply moved further into the shadows. The business model even exported itself across the British Empire. In Melbourne, Australia, an English emigrant named Frances Knorr established her own baby farming operation. Her network collapsed when investigators discovered 3 infant bodies buried in the garden of a rented house on Davies Street. Knorr confessed to killing 2 of the children. She was hanged at the old Melbourne jail on January 15, 1894. The true scale of this economy remains entirely unknowable. Because Victorian society had no central registry for children, no formal adoption laws, and no reliable infant death records, thousands of children vanished without a trace. These killers did not need to hide in dark alleyways. They operated in plain sight, turning the disposal of children into a routine business transaction. Victorian institutions did not fail by accident. They collapsed under the weight of their own assumptions. When multiple deaths occurred in a single household, confirmation bias steered officials away from suspicion. Neighbors and doctors blamed bad luck, weak constitutions, or divine will. This denial made patterns of murder invisible. Even when regulations existed, they lacked teeth. The Arsenic Act of 1851 required buyers to sign a register, but many chemists treated this as a mere formality. Anyone with a few pence could secure lethal doses of poison under the guise of killing rats or refining cosmetics. Respectability served as an absolute shield. Local authorities simply refused to believe that a church-going wife or a maternal caregiver could be a calculated predator. This bias extended to the examination table. Victorian medical men routinely avoided detailed autopsies on female bodies, choosing social modesty over rigorous investigation. Science existed to catch these killers, but institutions refused to pay for it. The Marsh test could identify minute traces of arsenic, but county courts viewed forensic chemistry as a costly luxury. Coroners regularly declined the test to save money and avoid accusing respected local citizens. These systemic blind spots allowed killers to operate for 10 to 20 years before facing scrutiny. The horror of the era did not stem from exceptional monsters. It lay in a society that normalized the quiet deaths of the vulnerable. We still look for monsters in dark, shadowy alleys. Yet the greatest dangers sit comfortably in our living rooms. They wear the trusted masks of caretakers and neighbors. Even today, those who weaponize domesticity remain the hardest to catch. Which of these cases do you think should have its own full Netflix documentary? Leave your answer below. Subscribe for more untold true crime.